and I'd like to call to order the Bloomfield Hills special meeting for July 18th, 2023. Trustee Van Gimmer, you can take attendance.
All board members are present.
You stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, item number 2, introductory comments, public community feedback opportunities. All meeting reviews are open to the public and are live streamed, Comcast, and recorded for later viewing. Recordings and information on the superintendent search is also available on the Board of Education's webpage. Those present at the viewing interviews and watching remotely may also provide feedback to the Board of Education for consideration at www.bloomfield.org/feedback. We'll move on to item number 3, superintendent candidate interviews. Nicholas Russo, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources at Walled Lake Consolidated School District in Walled Lake, Michigan. Okay. Good evening. On behalf of the Bloomfield Hills Schools, I would like to welcome Nicholas Russo to this interview for the position of Superintendent. Mr. Russo is currently the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for Walled Lake Consolidated School District in Walled Lake, Michigan. I'd like to take a few moments to briefly describe our format. The interview may take up to 90 minutes. There will be 21 questions from the board. Towards the end of the interview, time permitting, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions to the board and make closing statements. We will let you know if time is becoming an issue and if there needs to be time to pick up pace for any of your responses. For those reviewing the interview, we welcome feedback, whether present in the audience or watching live stream video, or if you may also use the QR code to provide feedback for this purpose. Although the task of choosing our next superintendent is the responsibility of the Board of Education as elected representative of our community, we value and seriously consider the input of our stakeholders in this process. I'll begin with the opening questions, and we'll start the time once the question is read. Mr. Russo, here's the first question. While we have an opportunity to review your application materials, audience members may not have. So please briefly review your background and share what caused you to be interested in this position at this point in your career. The questions are also posted behind me.
First of all, good evening, and thank you very much for the opportunity to interview for superintendency here in Bloomfield Hills. I'm very excited about the opportunity to lead this school district. My name is Nick Russo, and I am the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources in Walled Lake Consolidated Schools. And as you can see from my cover letter and my resume, I've had a host of administrative experiences that have prepared me for the superintendency. In addition to my administrative experience, I have a educational specialist degree from the University of Michigan Flint in executive leadership. I have a master's degree in educational leadership from the Wayne State University, and I have a Bachelor of Arts in elementary education from Michigan State University. I am also a graduate of the Asst.Supt Academy from the Michigan Leadership Institute. I've had a really great career so far, and I've had the experience of being in 3 outstanding school districts in Southeast Michigan in my career. I started in Utica Community Schools, where I was a teacher, I was a media specialist, and I became a principal. I had the fortune, believe it or not, to be in Utica when we were servicing about 30,000 students, and it was some tumultuous times financially. And so that was a great learning experience for me. Back in the day, you might remember when we had a $470 cut, from the governor, and we had to cut right away. We had to cut $14 million from our $330 million budget right away. And our first order of business was to do a facility study and look at our projected enrollment. That resulted in that process was expedited because we needed to cut that money quick, and in pretty swift fashion, we closed 4 elementary schools. I was a principal of one of the elementary schools that consolidated with another, and so I took in 175 new students, 11 new staff members, and I had the task of building a new team for a new community. And I have to say that was very inspiring in my career. It was one of the highlights of my career. I was able to take 2 communities that had been kind of cemented separately in the Utica schools and pull them together. And I did that by having, through the summer, did some team building activities. I took parents and I took staff members on the bus to see all of where our new subdivisions and our catchment area was going to be. And it was an opportunity of a lifetime where I was able to build a brand new learning community. In Walled Lake, currently, I've had the opportunity to do a lot with hiring, with retention, with recruitment. And it's a district where we service about 12,600 students, 0 to 26. And aside from being a chief negotiator for the 6 bargaining contracts that we have and our 6 units, our unions, I also have created an Aspiring Administrators Academy. I've created an employee assistance program, exit and stay interviews, and had a great experience taking over someone who my predecessor started a new teacher orientation that I built upon. So I've had some great experiences of looking from executive level and at the principal level of building new teams and building new initiatives. And in the middle of those 2 experiences, I was here in Bloomfield as the principal at Conant Elementary, which was probably the most transformational experience of my career, of my administrative career. What I learned in Bloomfield is that my passion relies in building authentic relationships and building systems for improvement. When I came to Bloomfield, Conant was a great school, was an outstanding building, and I was able to, bless you, and I was able to move that to another level, and that was another awe-inspiring part of my career. Personally, I'm married. My wife is Tammy. She's an HR professional right here in Bloomfield, not in Bloomfield schools, but works in Bloomfield Hills. And we have 3 children. I have a 21-year-old who is at University of Michigan, who's a ABA tech right now and studying to be a teacher, and she is getting a degree in psychology and education. My son is at Grand Valley. He's a 20-year-old student who's also an EMT, and he has one speed. He works, so that's great. And I have a daughter who is a rising junior, and she'll be most recently added to our fleet of vehicles and driver's license, so wish me luck there. But I'm a very proud father, and I'm a very proud educator.
Question 2, what are the immediate challenges you would expect to face as our superintendent? Given these, tell us how you would hit the ground running on your first day and be ready to address these challenges.
So immediate challenges in Bloomfield, I think, is going to be time. Depending on when this really wraps up, I'll give you an opportunity to look at my 90-day plan later in this process. But depending on when I would come aboard, I think one of the biggest challenges is going to be time. I want to be able to meet with each individual board member to get to know each other, to really just build relationships, and then come together through the MLI, have a board retreat where we talk about goals and expectations and roles and responsibilities, our communication protocols, and what's going to work for us as a team of 8. And I think you'll hear that hopefully you'll hear that in my interview today and in my 90-day plan, that this team of 8 is really critical to the success of Bloomfield. And so I think that is going to be the immediate challenge, is I know that the interim of Randy Lipa is he's going to be fine opening the schools and seeing some of the situations with the bond. But all of these things are happening while you're bringing someone new on board, and I think that's going to be a challenge. As to where are we going to carve out time to do all that while all of these other things are happening around the district. I think a bonus is that I've built relationships with a lot of folks inside the community, meaning internally and externally. So I don't think that will be a huge challenge for me. Although I do want to have superintendent symposiums so that I can get face-to-face time with our community, and the community can get face-to-face time with me to discuss what they want and list their concerns. But I think that's not time-bound during the school day, right? And so I feel that there's the time is probably the biggest challenge coming on board in the middle of August to October.
Question number 3. Given your research of what you know about our district, what would you believe are the 2 or 3 most critical long-term priorities that we need to address? How would your background and skills help us in addressing these priorities?
So a long-term priority in all of public education, and specifically in Bloomfield, they're not immune to it, is the labor shortage. And the labor shortage is not just about teachers. What we found in the past couple of years is that there are many folks who do not want to have in-person work. And so finding staff, finding folks who would come to work in person and be in front of children is a long-term challenge that we have to meet. I believe that my last 2 years in human resources in Walled Lake have really prepared me to look at what recruitment and retention strategies we would use to do that. When we talk about recruitment, we're not really talking about a lot of people who are viable right now. Our colleges of education are down 37% across the state, and in some places 55%. We are not having a pool of candidates that are coming out for teaching and for paraeducators. And so I really would lean into what retention looks like. And retention looks like not only what we can do to build inside of our collective bargaining agreements and what our wages and compensation packages and fringe benefits might look like, but also what is the culture in Bloomfield? What are the things we can do that might set us apart in terms of culture, in terms of other benefits that people aren't offering? One of those ideas might be offering money for advanced degrees. That's not something that a lot of districts in our area do. And I know that all costs money. And so one of the things I'd be proponent of is the enhancement millage, because right now in Oakland County we are fighting with Macomb County and Wayne County, who have enhancement millages and are able to recruit and retain people with some better salaries and benefits. And if we did receive that, it would be at 2 mills, just at 2 mills in this district as an example, it would be about $3.5 million annually. So that's something that I think is a nice piece to having the ability to retain. And I think another big long-term goal would be the MTSS process. I think Bloomfield has really great scores. We have really great test scores around our district. But what we want to really be sure of is that we are setting ourselves up to meet the needs of every single student and the different types of students who are going to come into our schools over the course of the next 2, 5, 10 years. And having a robust MTSS process will allow us to identify needs, identify the needs of students, whether elementary, middle, or high school, and really build upon what that looks like. I look at MTSS as almost a plan for not only individual students, but what we're doing for groups of students at each and every level, right? When we see that students at the elementary and middle school might not be going into a college prep course or a college prep pathway, we have to be able to be nimble enough to offer other things that they will be successful in, graduate, and have other opportunities besides just college prep. And so I think that MTS process, building that and seeing what the needs of our students are so that we can meet the needs, is going to be a critical situation moving forward.
Excellent. Good evening. I'll have the next 3 questions. What is your experience with threat assessments, and what have you learned from those experiences?
So the building level administrators are dealing with threat assessments on the daily, and that's something that's just part of the everyday world that we live in education, and I'm sure that we're experiencing that here in Bloomfield on the daily as well. My experience is that as a human resources professional in Walled Lake, I worked in support of our deputy superintendent, who really handled most of our safety and security. But what we decided together, and you'll hear a little bit more about this later, I hope, is that it was incumbent upon us to make sure that there were many people in our districts trained. We have 20 buildings in Walled Lake Consolidated Schools, and so we wanted to make sure that there were social workers, psychs, sometimes building administrators, enough people trained so that when something happens, we can be nimble enough to move someone to do a threat assessment, right? Our biggest concern and threat assessments was, is it going to be standard across? In one of our high schools, is it going to be the same thing that's done here as it is in the second high school, in High School A and High School B? And so we went with a company called CSTAG, which allowed us to have training on our terms when we wanted to, and as frequent as we needed to, in order to have every single staff member that we wanted to trained the same way in executing these. The bonus of using that was it's married to or accompanied with ALICE training. And so it really helps us to put all of this as a package together. And even though it's not the element or the company that Oakland Schools went with, we were ahead of that. And so we decided that this was what we needed to do in front of what Oakland Schools was doing. I will say that another layer of the threat assessment as well as that we implemented was the suicide risk assessment. And again, all of our staff who are trained in that are trained in the exact same way to make sure that we're doing this with fidelity, that it's not different from one building to another. And I think that's key, especially what we saw in Oxford and we see around the country, that we want to make sure that everyone is doing this with fidelity. So we provide training, we provide training, we provide refresher courses, and the bonus of the package that comes together with ALICE is that we have a digital footprint of we have a digital portfolio, actually, I should say, of all of our threat assessments. So there might be a child or a few children maybe who have a few of those, or there might be a ninth grade situation where it's happening often in ninth grade, let's say, as an example. Well, I almost consider that like heat mapping, that we can take a look at that and say, where do we need to provide other resources to help our students? Right, if we see that there's a frequency, an increase in threat assessments, either with a single student or a group of students or in an area, we can then address that by looking at PBIS and what are we offering. We can address that by doing a host of things, moving our social workers to a different building, making sure that we're addressing the needs, even through curriculum. What do we need to do to meet the needs of those students? And so that's my experience with threat assessments. I can assure you in Bloomfield, I would take this another even step further and go make sure that we have a team of administrators who are prepare trained, and maybe that's already happening here already, I don't know that, and the response to actual threats, right? What we do know is that threats, we can never, one size does not fit all. We're never going to figure out every single situation, but we can be trained and prepared as possible and through a system that is as best as we can. Is this loud?
We can hear you. Superintendents are often faced with the challenge of making decisions when there is no clear right answer and members of the community are split on the right path forward. Talk about a time when you were faced with a difficult decision where you knew there would be a group of people unhappy with your decision no matter what you chose to do. How did you go about making that decision and getting people on board with the direction you determined was best?
So in leadership, I feel like that happens often, right? If we're in leadership, if we are not, I want to make sure I have the question right, unhappy with your decision no matter what you chose to do, I think in leadership that happens often. A good example of that is in September of 2022, post-pandemic, much post-pandemic, I would say, I came to cabinet with an idea that we were going to take all of our conferences, kindergarten or pre-K actually through 26, and make them virtual. Believing that was the industry standard, which at the time it was, we had a discussion about it. We thought that was the right move. And so we did that. I sent a message through email to all of our staff, letting them know that we are going to do, all conferences are going to be virtual this year. We then let that marinate for a couple days, and then we communicated that with our community. To say they were less than pleased is an understatement. I've dealt with folks at our public comment during board meetings, just telling me that was the worst decision I could have made, and because it was a human resources decision, it fell on me. I met with parents. I met individually with parents in my office, many phone calls, public comment, and what I didn't realize, and that was a mistake, right? We're not going to get everything perfectly right every time. What I didn't realize was that there were a group of parents, I would say maybe 10%, who felt like this was a way for me or a way for us to keep parents out of the schools. And I think post-COVID, they felt like they were in part of the school and they wanted to get back in, and I didn't see that. That was a blind spot for me. The impetus for that really was ease of what we learned from COVID, right? That a virtual conference, a virtual IEP offered us to be nimble, us to have a little bit of variety and access points that we didn't have prior. And so I explained that, and in fairness, they accepted that. So we went through with our virtual conferences in September. Well, from that announcement in September, we did 3 months of conferences as our district has, and what I promised them at both in conversations and public meetings, that we would survey all of our parents specific to elementary, specific to middle school, and specific to high school. And if you had one of each, you could fill out all 3 surveys. And what we did was we took that data. What we learned was in our high schools, most high school parents were really happy with the idea that it was virtual. They didn't want to come to the high school, wait for 5 minutes. They were very adamant about this. 91% of our parents were in favor of virtual conferences, as well as about 93% of our staff. At the middle school, it was a little less than that. It was a little more 70-30, and at the elementary school, it was about 60-40. So moving forward, after reflecting and learning and getting input from the community, we transitioned to elementary was going to be hybrid, middle school was going to be hybrid, high school would be all virtual. And we cemented that into an LOU in our collective bargaining agreement as well for the next 2 years, to say that we were going to do this for the next 2 years and see where that takes us. And so I feel like the learning there for me was that as much as we thought we knew, we didn't know it all. And so surveying our community prior to on something that might be really simple, that I thought was really simple, and what I heard from most parents was that they wanted that. It wasn't all. So to make sure that we're hearing the voices of everyone in every situation.
What impact has the use of standardized testing results had on our public education system?
So I think their standardized tests are both good and bad. I can look at by level and say that at the elementary level, I think there's too much time spent on our standardized tests with our students. Our M-STEP takes a little too long, and I think that's a little too grueling for students. But at the high school level, our standardized tests have become a gateway for college admissions, for scholarship opportunities, for which college am I going to get into, and it's become a bigger beast than I think what was intended. But I think if we look at what standardized tests could offer, I believe standardized testing could offer a chance for us to look at how we're doing against other states, other counties, other districts, and as long as we're ensuring that we have multiple data points along with that, right? We don't want to use standardized tests in isolation. We don't want to use them solely for student growth. What we want to do is look at that as a measurement of our programming, along with our localized assessments, our adaptive assessments, and other things that we're giving to give a picture, of a more holistic picture of what students are experiencing at all 3 levels. But when we take the standardized test results, and they're only annually, right? For most of these are annually, and so it's difficult to use that only. So we take all of these assessment scores, and I think we can actually do something really good with that and use it to have some student goal setting, right? If these are standard-based assessments at the elementary and middle school level, I don't see a reason why we wouldn't want to do that. To take, here's where we see our programming maybe strengths. For example, we could have a third or fourth grade programming strength that everyone across the district in Bloomfield Hills has done a great job in dividing fractions. So we know that we're hitting that in the right, we're aligned well across the district. But if we see an area where, this is not just a 2 or 3 student problem, this isn't a economically disadvantaged problem, this isn't an ethnic problem, this is a problem of our programming, we can then address those needs and help to bolster that for all students. So, and we can also make that part of the goal setting for students, that this is something that we're going to work on. And so I think we can be used as a leverage point. I just don't like the length of it for most of our elementary and middle schools. In the high schools, I think the students at 17, 18 years old are apt enough to handle it. I just don't like the length of it for our elementary and middle school students.
Trustee Hill?
How do you think various stakeholders, such as parents, staff members, and community members, should be involved in our planning process and setting direction for the district?
I think everyone needs a voice to start. Everybody needs a voice. If we look at strategic planning, and when I say planning process and setting direction for the district, I'm assuming that's what we're talking about, is some type of strategic planning. If I were to come into superintendent, I guess one disadvantage would be that at the timing of this, we would already have a comprehensive PD plan in place for the school year, I would assume. And so one of the things is as part of that, I would like to have had an opportunity to build in some questions about what's going well and what you see are areas of concern for staff. And half days set aside for PD are great ways to do that. If that's not an option for me if I am blessed to get the position, if that's not an option for me, then a survey would be the best way in which to do that. Because I do think that everybody needs a voice. That's where we'd start. We would then survey our parents and community members with either in-person meetings or surveys or a combination of both. And then I think it's up to our cabinet to look at all of that data, to say what do we have here? What are our through lines of what's going well? What are our through lines of where the community, where the teachers, where the paras, where the secretaries think we need assistance or we need to be improved? And it's up to our cabinet to take a look at that and then present that to leadership. And when I say leadership, I mean all of district administrators, to see, do we agree or disagree with what these findings are? Once we have that, I believe that it's a good possibility that we could hire an outside company, outside facilitator, to help us create a strategic plan based on that information, which would have to be approved and then adopted by the team of 8. I say that because I think using an outside facilitator takes out the emotion sometimes of what people might feel, that they might not agree with this one thing in this item or this item over here, and using an outside facilitator takes out the emotion for that process. So I would advocate for that if the board was interested. But in summary, I do believe that it should involve all stakeholders to have a voice, and the process really does begin with cabinet looking through what our through lines are.
Thank you. Next question. How do we create a district-wide culture of continuous improvement, planning strategically, and aligning our actions to achieve strategic outcomes?
You're going to get bored of hearing me say the same thing over, I'm sure. I think it all starts with the team of 8 here. How do we create a district-wide culture of continuous improvement is by looking at ourselves and saying, what goals are we setting for the district? And are we reflecting on those goals? Are we meeting them? Are we progress monitoring these goals? And if we're meeting these goals, should we extend them? If we are not, do we need to tweak them? And what is the reason why we're not meeting them, right? I believe that if this team of 8 sets that as our norm, then that sets my norm for cabinet the same way. What are our goals for cabinet? How are they aligned to our board goals? How are cabinet's goals then aligned to our our principal's goals, how our principal's goals then align to our teacher goals, so that, for lack of better analogy or parallel, we have all of our crewmen rowing in the same way, right? That the ship has a mission and vision, and we're following along to get there. I think that planning strategically, it says, and aligning our actions to achieve strategic outcomes, I think that's exactly what that is. I can't think of a better process than that, than setting that norm and expectation for our team of 8 and making that the beginning of the culture. That's what starts culture and bleeds it throughout the organization.
Next, effective and timely communication is vital to the success of a school district. Please describe the type of communication students, staff, parents, and the board should expect to receive from you.
I really like these questions up on the screen. I think to start, I don't want to commit to anything about communication with the board until we would have a chance to get to know each other and know what your expectations of me would be and what my expectations for communication in response would be as well. If I had to do that, because I know that, again, time would be one of our big challenges, I think, coming on board here. If I had to do that, I believe it would be a weekly update that I would provide to the board with anything that might be time sensitive in terms of if there's something that happened at the high school that got out on social media, or there was some problem that there was a safety concern that ended up to be nothing, but you should be aware. I would send that email right away, right? Send you a text, please check your email, and there's something important there. It's not 911, but you need to know before something happens. I think I would want to have that board retreat and learn each other and learn about each other and build the relationships for what our expectations are for each other before committing to that. But in terms of communication to students, staff, parents, I believe our communications department can send out a weekly update of all of the great things happening and all of the things that are going on in our district. The one thing I think that happened post-COVID is that we learned that super saturating people with information didn't really get us far. Right? Too much information, sometimes things get lost, and so we want to highlight what's really important and keep it within our goals and our vision. But a weekly communication to community members and parents from our communications department about what's happening in the district is probably appropriate. When you talk about communication to students and staff, I plan to visit schools as frequent as possible, and I know that in this position, being in the position I'm in now as Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources in a district that has 20 schools, 3 comprehensive high schools, it's a challenge. It is not the sole role of the superintendent to be visiting schools every day. The sole role the role of the superintendent is to make sure that I'm overseeing operations and attending to the needs of the community. But I would make sure that I visit and have that communication, that direct communication with students and with families as much as I possibly can, building it into the calendar. Actually, probably Rebecca building it into the calendar.
All right, Mr. Russo, thank you for spending time with us. Appreciate it. First question from me. How would you ensure that our district spending is aligned with our priorities?
So I think it goes back to our articulated mission and vision and what we're spending money on in terms of resources, programming, and staff. All districts in Michigan I can speak to, there's a certain amount that has to go towards staff. Salaries and benefits are a huge cost to a district, and so making sure that we are staffed appropriately, not overstaffed or understaffed in all of our facets, and seeing what our allocation for that is, and building that out for years. When you ask the question, is aligned with our priorities, we want to look 2, 3, 5 years out, right? We have collective bargaining agreements with our members. We have commitments that we have to make in terms of bonds. We have commitments we have to make up in terms of outside services, third party services, and so making sure that we are allocating that portion of the pie, so to speak, in an appropriate fashion. So matching percentages, and I am not a financial wizard, So I would lean into our folks here in finance and to help with this and to report out to us what, just like we do every year annually and probably quarterly, what is our budget update? How are we going? So bouncing that against what are we actually spending money on, and is it aligned with our vision, is the question we ask a cabinet, and make sure that we are recommending if we need to change that, right? Do we need to increase FTE? Do we need to decrease FTE? Are there resources? Are we over-resourcing our middle school math curriculum? Are we under-resourcing? I think those are questions that involve a high-performing cabinet where the person for learning services, myself, finance, all work together, and human resources, if we're talking FTE, to make sure that we're on the right page.
Okay, thank you. What opportunities do you believe budget limitations present? In tough financial times, what are your top 3 priorities?
Mr. Follett, can I get 4 priorities? Because I having lived this in Utica schools, I was administrator in Utica schools, and being the second largest district in the state, it has a lot of great has a lot of great bonuses, a lot of advantages, right? But it also, when you're running a $330 million organization with 48 buildings that you're running, when they cut $470, we cut $70 million from a budget of a $330 million budget, and it still wasn't enough. We closed schools, we rationed paper. I could go on and on and on, and it almost became, at some level, sometimes it became death by paper cut, and that's not what we want to do. So having to I guess it's a bonus that I have that in the side view mirror, and I can look back and say, I think that my first priority is not touching the classroom. At all costs, we want to protect the classroom. And what that means is resources, class size, as best as possible. We want to protect the classroom. We want to protect the teacher. If there's paras needed, that's our main priority. Excuse me. I also believe that another priority would be no reduction that would disproportionately affect our low SES or economically disadvantaged students. And what I mean by that is sometimes people can say, well, we need to cut this, and here's a really easy way to do it. We can cut transportation. Cutting transportation could cut $8 million from our budget. I'm using an arbitrary example. But for those students who rely on transportation, that would be inadvertently and disproportionately hurting them if they can't get to school. I would protect extracurricular activities as best as possible, because there are some students who come to school for the purpose of playing soccer after school, for the purpose of being in band, for the purpose of, if we are a comprehensive high school and we are a comprehensive school district, we want to offer these opportunities, and I want to protect that as best as possible. And the last, which is not as mainstream, is that we want to protect ourselves against any liabilities or future litigation with not cutting anything that might be tied to special education, that might be tied to something that's absolutely necessary for student success. So if we have programs in our district, we have, at Wing Lake, if we want to cut some things that we say, hey, we have 7 nurses, I'm using an arbitrary example. We have 7 nurses, we want to cut 2 or 3, but if it's part of a student's IEP or it's going to adversely affect the students and their ability to function, then we can't do that. We want to protect ourselves from litigation as well.
Okay, thank you. Last question from me. Please describe your experiences with millage renewals, bond proposals, and sinking fund proposals. Were these experiences successful? Why or why not?
So in terms of bonds, I've been involved in both successful and non-successful bonds. We'll talk about the successful ones first. So in order to run a successful bond, I think first we want to have a facility study and involve the community to the extent possible, and I mean to the optimal extent possible. And I know that we've done this from Bloomfield forward. When I was here at the time, that was just starting. We were in a scope and design phase, and I know that we did some master property planning prior to that, and really had a comprehensive way to look at everything. And I think that was the right way to go. And successful bonds begin with that. And then we have to look at, are we on time for Treasury, given that what election do we want to hold this bond? Do we want to hold this election? Do we want to put it in a May election? Do we want to put it in a November election? And we have to keep the end in mind and keep designing forward from that point. I think if we're also talking how we to get a successful bond, it's positive marketing. It's knowing when and how and who to market. I think we look at what community members have been involved and what have not been involved, and then try to really reach out to those to make sure that everyone has the information they need before going to a vote. One of the unsuccessful bonds that happened in Macomb County was that we did a special education bond election, because it's a different setup in Macomb County. And one of the reasons that it failed, in my opinion, is because there are so many districts in the county and so many folks that were involved weren't privied to the right information ahead of time. And so the first time they did it, it failed. And so I think that's a critical piece to a successful bond, is to making sure that the community is aware and knows what exactly will happen. In terms of sinking funds, it's always easier to do a renewal than a new bond. I'm sorry, let me back up. In terms of a sinking fund, it's always good to do, or a millage, to do a renewal and not a new one, because it's to our advantage that taxes won't increase for the most part. And so I think that's another way to pass a successful millage and sinking fund.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Noble?
Well, thank you for being here today. I'm going to ask you some questions about staff and personnel. How would you interact with other administrators in our district? How would you strike a balance between giving them the support and autonomy they need to lead effectively while holding them accountable as appropriate and necessary?
I think there's a fine balance always between support and autonomy, right? But I think I think it starts with a high-performing cabinet team. I think getting a cabinet, the cabinet members together to build a culture of this is why we're here to support you, but still holding them accountable through, again, come back here, through the team of 8 and our goals. Right? If we have goals that are aligned for the district, or that are set forth for the district, it's really my job to make sure that each department through cabinet is aligning their goals to our goals, and so on and so forth, as it goes to principals and then goes to teachers. I think that if accountability is everything. I struggle with the question, because while holding them accountable as appropriate, I think it's always appropriate to hold people accountable. I don't see a reason why we wouldn't hold people accountable. I think we want to always assume positive intent, and I think we always want to have we always want to coach and teach and structure improvements that help and leverage our folks in that side of our district. But I think that's part of accountability as well. Accountability doesn't necessarily mean that someone's out, right? That I think it's always appropriate to be accountable, especially if we are going to build a culture where our goals are aligned to our vision and our mission.
Thank you. Please describe your most successful experience with building a high-performing work team.
Ms. Noble, I'm gonna ask if I can give you 2.
Okay.
So I'll go back to school consolidation at Utica was one. The story of that was a success story of building a high-performing team. To intake 11 new staff members out of 31 total, you're having a third of your staff is new. You have 175 students added to a building that was about 370 at the time. So we're at about 540, 550 when school opens. It's a much bigger school. We had extra classrooms to do certain things. We had nothing, right? We were packed to the gills, which was great. And we had staff members that I built a team where we came together through the summer. We did team building activities. we put kids first in every facet of our thinking, and it was very intentional. It had to be, right? Community members had some trepidations about going to a new school. As I said, some people had sent their kids to the same school for generations, right? My kids and my grandkids, and everyone has gone to this building. And when that building closed, we had to welcome them with open arms and say, this is the right spot for you. This is our team that will take care of your children. And as I said in my opening, it was an awe-inspiring experience for me. The team building aspect of that, and making sure that we had a promise to each other that we would know that everyone in the building would know every kid's name by October 1st. And it was great. We had a great 3 or 4 year run that was outstanding. And I would say the second one is when I came here. When I came to Conant Elementary, there were some great things happen. There were some outstanding things happening. The way teachers spoke to students, the way students spoke to each other, the way we had so much inquiry-based instruction from the minute I walked in, and I mean inquiry. When I say inquiry-based instruction, I'm even talking about inquiry-based, just maybe not even instruction. The cultural side, the kind side, the positive behavior sides. It was a building that was running on all cylinders. But what I did see is I took a year to learn and listen. I took a year to say, what are we missing here that can make it even better? And that should be the role of any great leader, that they come into a situation and they say, this is what's outstanding, and I can even make that better, right? It was an opportunity to do that. And one, to be quite frank, one of them was that we were not using data as best as we could. And so my first order of business after the first year was to encourage us to get another reading recovery teacher. So we had 2 reading recovery teachers which is an amazing situation for kids in this district. That 20% of the building could be covered with reading recovery to help students learn to read is outstanding. And to look at how we were doing our building instructional team to make sure that we were actually on point and that we were spending our time efficiently. So we used meeting mechanics, where we said, we're going to talk about the student for 18 minutes. We're going to be very intentional about what we're going to bring forward, about what our concerns are, or what the high performance are, and how we're going to get that student to even excel higher. And so it was the use of data that was just a little bit of a tweak that allowed us to do interventions both for remediating and interventions for helping kids soar. And it just wasn't happening at that level yet, and that was a good change that we implemented. And it wasn't without pushback, right? I came there, and someone had been there for years, and a lot of the staff had been there for years, and we did a lot of team building so that we had buy-in.
Thank you. What would you suggest in terms of a comprehensive professional development plan for our educators? Specifically, what would be the key priority areas as well as the delivery system?
So I think that question is dependent upon what we're actually, what key priority areas we're talking about. If they are brand new, then I think we have to start with buy-in. How do we present this, that this is what's best for kids? We first want to make sure that teachers, on all staff too, secretaries, paraeducators, everyone has buy-in for what we're doing. Then we want to do that with our community, our greater community. This is what we're proposing. This is the why. Excuse me. This is the why. And if it's new, it's going to take a couple years to implement. Let me rephrase that. It's going to take a year or so to implement, a second year to really refine, and then the third year is when we're really going to see results, and then 5 to 7 is when we really see the fruit of all those seeds that were planted. So if it's new, I think it's depending on what that would look like through the year. If it's something that we need to revisit, or we need to create, we need to create space for some teachers who haven't had it, then I think that we need to look at what our intended outcomes are and build the plan backwards. Look at the end in mind. What is the end of the year we want to accomplish, and build our plan from, what do our half days look like? What does our PD plan look like in terms of time? What does it look like in terms of delivery? Is it providing through Oakland Schools? Are we getting an outside vendor? All of these questions are going to be key in terms of building from the end in mind.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to Trustee Cohen.
Thank you. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for applying for this position. Congratulations making it this far in the process.
Thank you.
I'll be asking questions on instruction and curriculum. First question, what experience and success have you had with closing the achievement gap for economically disadvantaged and minority students?
So I can speak to two examples. I'll go back to the school consolidation where I was principal. And we went from, in the matter of the decision to merge schools, we went from about a 17% economically disadvantaged population to a 54% economically disadvantaged population overnight, which was a big impact to staff who had not been trained specifically about Tier 2, Tier 3 interventions. So looking at what are practices, both in math and reading, that can help economically disadvantaged students that might not be in a Tier 1 instructional model, meaning what students get in the everyday, what our general education students get, 80% of our students get, the Tier 1 works for them and they move on. For economically disadvantaged and minority students, there are some different practices that might be a little more strategic, and so building that as part of our repertoire of instructional practices, K-8, K-12, is really the key in closing the achievement gap. When we first took in the 175 new students and built that new team, our actually gap rose. It rose for the first 2 years because it was in, well, all data is a year behind. So my data says, oh, you now have this huge gap that you didn't have before. So once we identified what we could do and look at trend data, both at our local assessments and then what our Asst provided for us, and back then I think it was actually NEEP data, we were able to address that and close that gap. And I would say the same thing in Conant. We had the leverage of the instructional specialists at the elementary school here in Bloomfield was outstanding. We could meet with small groups of students, whether they were economically disadvantaged or not, to raise the proficiency levels there. And back in 2015-16, we saw a disproportionate African American males in our building were disproportionately not successful in reading and writing. And so we made that a concerted effort to look at the data of those individuals and make sure that they were getting the interventions and instruction to meet their needs, whether they were kindergarten students, whether they were fourth grade students, it didn't matter. But we closed the gap in both of those as I don't like saying this, but the blue ribbon, right? That was something we applied for. That was something we were given for that purpose. And so the proof is there that we were able to do that for economically disadvantaged students at Conant.
Thank you. Please give us examples of education change or reform you have initiated in your career has led to improvements in student learning.
So as a fifth grade teacher, we're going to say this is about 2004. The idea that data-driven decision making was really taking hold in education, and that was teachers actually were like, what are we going to do with this data-driven decision making? What does this look like? Because it was not part of our professional repertoire up until that point. And so I think the reform of data-driven decision making. And I want to clarify what I'm saying, that it's not just linear, that it's really dimensional data. We don't want to look at just test scores. We want to look at what are students' backgrounds, what are students' behaviors, what are students' likes and dislikes, what are students' propensity toward this, what are students' what do they do extracurricular. So we're using dimensional data to drive how we're helping students and improve student learning. Because if we're treating the whole child, student learning is a byproduct that's coming up, right? It's not just that we're addressing the student learning. If we're just looking at test scores and we're just looking at data in a linear fashion to say, well, this student got this on if I'm just in Pinella and now I want to put him here and now I want to get him here, and we're only looking at that data, first of all, we want to triangulate other pieces of data, but we want to look at the whole child to do that. That's the best way to address students K-12, well, pre-K-12.
What is the biggest risk you have taken to do what's right for children?
So again, I say a leader is going to take a lot of risks all the time. I hope that would be the case. A good leader would take a lot of risks, because if not, I don't think they're really leading much. But I believe that the biggest risk I take often is addressing the tenured teacher that's not right for kids. And that, again, I'll go back to accountability. That's not necessarily a bad word, right? We want to make sure that people are doing their jobs. We want to make sure it's my responsibility, ultimately as superintendent, that I'm going to have the right people in front of kids. It falls on me. And so I look at what we do for a teacher who we might have an idea of, this is really not working out, we're starting to get complaints, we look at data, there's a lot of kids failing the class, or whatever, whatever that might be. So as superintendent, I would ask our HR, I would ask Mr. McDonald to take a look at that deeply, and to dive into, what are we seeing here? What is the principal seeing? I want the principal to be in there looking at what the instruction looks like, what does their data look like, how is he or she treating kids, and to identify where there may be an area of concern. And again, accountability is not a bad word. We want to put them on an improvement plan. We want to give them an opportunity to improve. Always assume positive intent. We want to give them the opportunity to improve. Then we put the resources in place. What can we do to help you? We build that plan together. We want to make sure that individual feels comfortable and safe and secure, that we are supporting them. With that, if we have that level of support for teachers or for staff of any sort, administrators as well, if we have that level of commitment to them, I would expect the same commitment back, that they're going to work on that. If at that time we see an improvement, we continue to build that improvement plan to further them along. If not, then it's time to make decisions about what's right for kids. I don't want to mistake the message, that's not what, when you ask the question, what's the biggest risk? And I say that there's a lot of risks. I think that's a risk that's always worth taking, is to take a look at who we have in front of kids. It is my responsibility as superintendent to make sure that the right people are in front of students.
Thank you. Next question. Could you please describe your typical style of leading, and talk about situations in which you may vary from that style?
So this might be a boring answer. I feel that my style of leading is always situational. I don't find that I have a style that I lean into more often than not. I think that I have to assess what's going on, and that's a situational leader. I want to be as collaborative as possible in situations that lend itself to that. But there are other times where that's not appropriate. And I'll give examples. So when talking about being a chief negotiator, it's really important that I do collaborate with our person who's in charge of finance, to see what kind of money are we looking at to spend in this collective bargaining agreement. What kind of things do we want to wrap around? Do we want to do an employee assistance program? We want to be collaborative in nature. We want to say to our assistant superintendent for learning services, what kinds of things do we want out of this negotiation that will leverage learning for students, so that I can assess where we need to go, what contract language might need to change, or what we'd like to see changed, compensation, all of those pieces. That type of a situation lends itself to being collaborative. But there are times where that's not appropriate, right? When we talk about safety, security, if hypothetically, if there was a staff member who maybe did something inappropriate in front of kids or with a child in the building, or maybe was in a fight with an argument or a fight with another staff member, and I'm using an arbitrary example. When it's measured against safety and security, I have to just lead that and not be collaborative in nature. That's a situational leader where you have to take what you have and then determine how do I best serve students and the community members in Bloomfield to achieve a good outcome. Another example of collaborative leadership, which is when we're doing things like we're looking at programming, right? When we look at, I'll give a different example. When I came to Walled Lake, I realized soon that the amount of human beings who wanted to be in leadership was dwindling very fast, just like the labor shortage in every industry across the United States. And so it was upon me to do something about that. And so I decided that an aspiring administrators academy would be the right way to build a bench, so to speak, to elicit who might be interested in leadership, whether it be a building principal, whether it be for a farm, put someone a leader at the farm or the nature center. We have an outdoor education center in Walled Lake too, so I use that as an example. It's not just for building leaders, it's also for directors of special education, any piece of leadership. And so I collaborated with our assistant superintendent for learning services, with our deputy superintendent, to say, what is a deputy superintendent who these principals and these directors will be reporting to you, what do you want to see in your next round of leaders? So we sat, we talked, we built the profile of what we wanted to see in our next group of leaders. I then talked to our assistant superintendent for learning services. What are our big rocks that we're moving instructionally that I can address in building our bench, so that when they get to, if they want to, and they get to the point where they're going to be an administrator in our district, what is the knowledge base that they need in terms of instruction? And so I built a program based on that collaborative network of information, and I ran the program for a year. So I think, just to come back to the question, I think situational leadership is the style that I use, and I feel like is the most appropriate for a leader in a school district.
Thank you. What are the key elements needed to establish and maintain a good working relationship between you and our board?
So I really want to start by saying I really want to make sure we have a retreat, because I think learning about each other, getting to know each other, I said this before, meeting individually, you can see as part of my 90-day plan, I'll leave you. As part of my 90-day plan, I think we need to build relationships first, and so we can set expectations for each other. We can set communication protocols. We can talk about what it is we want out of each other. I will be your employee, right? I think it's important that you have clear expectations for me, so that I can have clear expectations for the people underneath me. And I would say that I would like to have expectations for you for honesty, transparency, respectful dialogue with each other. That if you have a concern with me, that you feel comfortable doing that. You feel comfortable bringing it up to me, and how can I improve? I feel like that goes back to the trust in relationships. If we don't have those relationships, that's not going to work out. And so I would hope that it was honesty, that it's respectful dialogue, that there's trust, that you're not going to trust me right away, that we have to build that trust. But I hope that there's always the positive intent, that the trust that I'm here to do the work of the school district, to build systems and processes that will continue to make Bloomfield the best there is.
Thank you. How do you inspire and engage the entire school community in support of the district's vision and mission?
So I look at that question and I see inspire, engage, and support. I think inspiring people is to always have a positive attitude, assume positive intent, and build positive cultures throughout the district. Building positive cultures starts with staff and students knowing expectations. That provides a sense of stability for people. It provides a sense of security. It provides a sense of we're all in this together. That, yeah, this feels right. So inspiring the entire school community, I think, I don't want to use the word easy, because that's not what I'm saying, but I think it is very much doable. Engaging the entire school community is in support of the district's mission. To engage them is really part of that strategic planning process. We want to engage them and give them every opportunity to participate should they want to. I think that's critical. It's the cornerstone of successful organizations in public ed, is that our parents are part of that process. Supporting, I feel, is a little bit of a challenge. I don't know that we will ever have full support 100% of the time from a community, right? We have many different people we serve. We have many different styles and qualities and ethnicities and values. And so sometimes to expect that we would have full support 100% of the time at all times, I don't think is realistic. I would say that we would want to engage that for it to happen, but when we have pushback on that, when people come to our public comment, or you hear things in the community, which, sometimes it's difficult as a board member when you hear things in the community and you don't know what to do with that information. It's always important that you bring that right to me, right? I want to be the one that you're telling that to so I can address it. But that's part of our data cycle. That's part of another data cycle, that we're getting feedback from community members, right? Mr. Van Gemert comes to me and says, this is what happened, and I heard this at Kroger, and I don't know if this is appropriate. And I say, okay, well, let's dive into that and investigate. And once I do, I see that, it's more than this. Maybe it's this, or this, and there's a couple examples of it. That's part of our data review cycle that says, we need to maybe look at this and do something different. Or we might find out that was really just one person, that it wasn't the real situation, it wasn't true, and we're really proud of the fact that we didn't have a knee-jerk reaction to that. And so I feel like if we're going to inspire and engage the entire school community in the process of planning, that should garner support for most of our families, for our district and our district's vision and mission. But I don't think we'll ever get 100% of the support 100% of the time. I just don't think that's realistic.
Thank you.
We'd like to take a few minutes now to provide you an opportunity to ask questions that you may have for the board.
So I have just one question. If I were to be your superintendent, what would be the measurement of success for me for the first year? What would you consider to be a success for me after the first year?
Trustee Hill,
Oh,
were you ready to respond?
no, I
Anyone?
wasn't. I guess someone.
So I could jump in. Okay. So obviously what's coming up in September is going to be the biggest change our district's gone through, probably in its history. So how we've managed through that change, both from a community perspective, student perspective, and a staffing perspective, and how we've gotten through that would probably be my number one priority in judging our next superintendent.
I would echo that the expectation is that, and this is like a captain kind of steering a ship to get us through this period of a lot of transition, new hires, new buildings, new staff, new students, new spaces for students, new friends, new everything. So that's a baseline expectation. But I would think for me, seeing or believing that it was success would be coming out the other side of that with a clear plan of what's on the horizon, having engagement with the community to make sure that they know what that vision is and that's been taken into consideration. I think so, navigating the rough waters and then being able to look out over and say, hey, we made it, and now here is what we can expect. And our vision is going to match with the community's vision holistically, and have a plan that everybody knows and sees and can expect what BHS will be like down the line. That to me would be a measure of success.
I think you both said what I was thinking, so I'm trying to think of anything else. I would say in the course of all these transitions, to be able to provide to make sure that every member of the staff has a clearly outlined, really knows clearly what their roles and expectations are, and that there's systems in place to properly measure those all the way up the line, so that there's no ambiguity about anyone's position and what it entails and what the expectations of the position are.
Lastly, given all the transition to the new facilities that are going to happen this coming year, improving the safety and making sure students feel secure in the new environment, and the same for the staff, and establishing those communication channels to both those constituents would be very important.
I think starting out with the new year and in a role where goals are established, I think just making sure that we're staying on track, on time, and on focus for our students, and bonding with our community, and building relationships with our teams of teachers and administrators within the district, as well as the Board of Education. So I think it just depends on also what individual goals you've established, and if you've met those metrics, and being honest and upfront when those metrics may fall short. Because success, I don't think, is determined upon reaching a goal, but it's the communication that gets you on track toward that goal and where you fall short. So I think it's important to have open and honest communication, because I think the other thing too is being honest with your team and upfront with your staff, because I think success is measured in various different components or steps along the way. And so I think keeping that open line between what's happening in real time and where goals are being met or not being met also are ways to measure some success outcomes.
I liked your answer to the question about, I'm not sure what the question was about, but you indicated you took a year to kind of understand. And I'm not saying that you should take a year to understand, but I think taking time to understand everyone that works for you and what they see as their responsibility versus what you see as their responsibility, and what you think is the best way, what they think is the best way, and finding out before making any decisions, like you said about the conferences, finding that out before you make the decision. And I think in order to be successful here, listening first before taking action is necessary.
Other questions?
No more questions?
You have 20 minutes remaining. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would like to read a closing statement, and I would like to say that in this packet I'm going to leave you is my 90-day plan, and it is not written in stone, right? The processes and the practices are. I want to make sure that all these happen, but in terms of the timing, will depend on what happens at the end of this course of your search. So inside of here is my 90-day plan and 3 letters of reference that I would ask you to take a look at. I want to thank you for the opportunity to interview. I'm ecstatic about the possibility of serving this community again. I see possibilities galore with what's happening. I know that the bond, all of this work is a major change. To Mr. Colin's point, it's a huge change in this district, and it's a lot of things going on. But it's exciting, because on the other end of that is going to be what this district has already planned for in terms of declining enrollment and all of the items that you've gone through. I don't have to rehash all of that from Bloomfield Forward and the plan that was built. And so I find it to be a very exciting time in the district, and I'm excited to join the team if I should be chosen. If I were to be hired, I come with a reputation of building positive culture, building high-performing teams, and building relationships. What I can promise you is that I'll be a positive champion for Bloomfield Hills Schools and that I will lead this district based on my pedigree of building systems, processes, and relationships that have proven to produce stability and a high-performance work environment. I'm not sure you'll find someone else who will work harder on behalf of families and students in Bloomfield. I thank you again for the opportunity to interview.
Thank you. Mr. Russo, we appreciate your interest in the superintendent position for Bloomfield Hills Schools. The board is interviewing 5 candidates this week. We'll let you know Thursday night where you stand in our search process. Thank you for your participation in our first round interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We will take a break and we will reconvene at 7:30.